I don't know who told us we were special, but we are not. Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we're talking about the worst people in the world, otherwise known as millennials. So before we begin, I'd like to give my brief recollection of the Millennial Experience. So for those who don't know, millennials, we are a transitionary generation. We've seen the progression in search engines, browsers, the birth of social media. I remember AOL, MSN, Yahoo, Ask Jeeves, Internet Explorer. The Cola Wars are a thing of the past and there was a winner. Unlike previous generations, we have pursued happiness like no other. And we are the kings and queens of just going about it in all the worst ways possible. We are all experts, but we've all read one book. And we remember when the outdoors meant biking, rollerblading, scootering. I remember the shoes with the little scooters. We are the pioneers of catfishing and online dating, age, gender, location. I remember I used to put up a picture of Christina Milian, and people are really bizarre. Like, rather than just acknowledge that this is a fake profile, they would try to confirm that you were that person. Like, oh hey, like Christina, like so weird to find you here on virus.com. But there were people really pioneering some evil stuff. Like, I would never think to use a picture of a real person. Like, that's like that's next level. I also remember when 25 cents went a long way. I remember jelly bean and gummy bear dispensers and how unsanitary those things must have been. Like, I don't think those things were ever cleaned out. We're old enough to remember disposable cameras and photo albums. And for a time, I truly believed Blockbuster was forever, because who would substitute the experience of driving in the freezing cold to pick up a movie that may or may not be there, only to return it within 2 to 3 business days or be fined. So all this to say, we're tired, we're exhausted. And so in this video, I thought it would be fun to use the film Worst Person in the World to outline what I think are common stages of millennial life. And so just to introduce the film, The Worst Person in the World is a movie which chronicles 4 years in the life of Julie, a young woman who navigates the troubled waters of her love life and struggles to find her career path, leading her to take a realistic look at what she wants and who she really is. Worst Person in the World follows Julie through different stages of her life, from her conception at university and the birth and death of her most serious relationships. The movie does a great job of articulating the millennial struggle, specifically our comfortability with time and it passing us fully by. The movie ends with Julie sitting alone, having made it as a photographer, editing a clip of her ex's new girlfriend or wife. And I can't tell if at the end of the movie she's thinking, what if? Like, what if I went with him? Or she's thinking, thank God, thank God I left this man. So watching Julie alone in her apartment, I did not get the sense that she was lonely. I think finding yourself is messy, but the key is to never fear starting over with family or friends. And by starting over, I don't mean being toxic with new people. I just mean kind of making decisions for yourself in order to become self-guided and self-motivated to have the experiences and relationships that you want. And I think one of the most difficult traits in life to acquire is confidence. And by confidence, I mean knowing when to exit the group chat, knowing when to leave a room. Like, you really have to know when it's done. Like, don't wait till everybody leaves and forms a new group chat. Like, just leave before that happens. And all this to say, like, you should be careful not to let external things validate your self-worth. Like your job, the amount of money you make, the amount of friends you have or you don't have. And the question the worst person in the world asks is, when does it all end? Oh, like, we've seen way too much. And the answer is it doesn't end, right? We're all a work in progress. And so much of my personal upbringing was based on milestones and achievements. So go to school, graduate, get married, have kids, get a job and die, as if the world needs more people. And that's not to say these things cannot bring you peace of mind, just when and in what order, that's really the question. And there's no one size fits all. I think some people think, well, what worked for my family or what works for me will work for you. What works for you works for you. Like, mind your business. Like, everybody has to go through their own trials and tribulations to figure it out. I do think milestones and achievements do help you progress faster. However, if peace is the mission, what these milestones and achievements should alert you to is how much more room you have to grow and evolve for the better. Like, there isn't a point in time where growth complete. Like, you will reach your happiness. That's a myth. You know, happiness is in the everyday. And so through Worst Person in the World, I will outline what I think are the millennial stages of life. So according to me, these are fear of missing out, fear of joining in, fear of better options, fear of commitment, fear of the unknown, and finally, the joy of missing out. So starting with FOMO, fear of missing out on something better or more exciting. I fell in love with this movie right at the start, when before we get into the thick of it, we're introduced to Julie and Julie's relationship with Axel. So like a lot of millennials, Julie took school seriously. One of my many regrets. There's what a job looks like and what a job actually is. And I think the jobs that look the best on paper are not well suited for us sometimes. You know, there's what we need and what we want, and this is not something that's emphasized in school. And so Julie studied medicine because her high grades meant something. And so as soon as she's in medical school, she realizes something's not quite right. And she switches to psychiatry. And then again, something's not quite right. And then she switches to photography after, you know, flipping through her phone and deciding, actually, I'm a visual person and I think this is the career for me. And throughout this process, she says, okay, now I know. And I think that's so important because millennials, you know, we're all about knowing, right? Like, we have to know that what we're doing is for now and forever and until death do us part. But, you know, what you know now changes, right? So the fact that she goes from medicine to art, I think, speaks to the grave disconnect between what we think we need and what we actually need. And a lot of us have to recondition ourselves again. And as a photographer, she's forced into the role of the observer, right? Like, you have to kind of step back and reassess what you think you know, because you are relearning. And so just like that, Julie breaks the monotony. She quits role modeling, breaks up with her boyfriend, changes her hair color, and decides it's time for life to begin. And I think there's a connection between school and FOMO, because everything you do in school is like a theoretical exercise, right? It's, you know, according to school, I can be whatever I want if I have the grades. But then when you actually get into the workplace, you're like, ooh, this is work? Like, this is what it means to work? And so there is that anxiety where you're like, okay, when do we go live? Like, when can we start? And that's exactly what Julie does. And so as soon as she starts over, the city becomes new again. She feels like alive again. And for her bravery, she meets Axel. So Axel is Millennial Goals. He's a successful cartoonist who seems to have a cult following. And he's one of the rare people who makes a living doing what he loves. And I always find people like this fascinating because they're the coolest. You know, doing what you love means maybe not having the salary you would like, not having the time you would like, or the relationships that you would like. And so, you know, when you see someone doing what they love, it means they really found peace in the everyday. And so when Axel and Julie first meet, he kind of foreshadows their demise. He tells her explicitly, like, listen, if we continue this relationship, it's going to end badly. You know, you are in a transitionary phase in your life. You need to figure it out, and you need to be free to explore. So Julie is 29, turning 30. And 30 is the age where you start to really correlate your age with your self-worth. And as soon as he says this to her, she falls in love with him. She's like, you are the best. And she falls in love with him because he has her back. You know, when someone kind of says something that you feel is so well-meaning, it's hard not to root for them. So just like that, they have this like honeymoon phase, and everything about Axel and Julie just fit, right? It's important to note that she moves into his flat, but he makes space for her, right? They have the same books, they have the same interests. It's kind of a dream scenario. You know, you want your partner to be your best friend ideally, and they're two people but they feel like one. They have conversations with ease. There's no jealousy. It's the easiest relationship that you will ever see. But sadly, all good things must come to an end. It takes me to the second stage of millennial life, fear of joining in. And so during a family gathering, Julie is getting increasingly frustrated with Axel's desire to have kids. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that she's not in the same place as Axel. So she works at a bookshop to supplement her career as a photographer, but things are taking a lot longer than you think they are. And it's really hard to say yes to something when you think it's your only option, which is why she doesn't want kids. So the whole thing about wanting to have kids, like every 30-year-old has heard this, where it's like, well, you're 30, it's a nice age to have kids. You're knocking on heaven's door. Like, what are you waiting on? What needs to happen before? You know, people are asking you all these logical and analytical questions, but it's the thing that needs to happen. I think sometimes people think we're waiting for something better. Oh, you don't want to have kids because, like, what are you waiting for? Like a high value man, a better job, like, and that's not what it is, right? You're waiting for, it's like a state of mind, right? You can't move faster than you're able to. And so what Julie is frustrated with is that she wants to do things at her own pace, but by doing so, she's kind of slowing Excel down. There's no worse feeling than thinking that you're holding someone back from something. And so this sort of crossroads that they're at, in terms of like, okay, where do we go from here, is what kind of is the beginning of the end of their relationship. This crossroads that Julie and Excel are at takes me to the next stage of millennial life, which is fear of better options. The movie starts off in the past, introduces us to Julie and Excel, and then fast forwards. And so in the time that Julie and Excel were together, Excel is famous and Julie still works at this bookstore. And so they're at this party and she has to excuse herself. And watching someone you love reach their potential is amazing. It's great, but it's also mixed emotions. On one hand, you're very happy that other people recognize in them what you see in them, what they see in themselves. However, there is that like chip on your shoulder where you're like, I could be doing more. And so she goes for a long walk and she's upset, she's crying. The whole point of the intro, I think, is to emphasize, like, you know, whatever she's waiting on has not happened yet. And if you're waiting for something to happen, something will happen, right? Why? Because you're looking for signs where maybe you shouldn't. And so one of these signs is literally an open door. So during her walk, she spots a party, and this party being a wedding, and so she crashes the party. And this was an appropriate metaphor, right? When one door closes, another one opens. And I don't think it's intentional, but this film kind of dismantles a few millennial tropes, one of them being love at first sight. So I think millennials, like no other, we really believe in love at first sight, you know, to our detriment. And the first time Julie meets Ivan, to the naked eye, it does look like love at first sight. But when you have this backstory with her and her boyfriend and this crossroads with having children, you realize it's more like love at first attraction. And so what is their attraction based on? Youth and time, right? Ivan, like Julie, is in the process of finding himself. She works at a bookstore, he works at a coffee shop. And when they first meet, he's kind of at a loss for words, right? He doesn't know what to say, but Julie has all the right words. And because she crashed this party, she's kind of walking around like she owns the place, giving unsolicited medical advice, just saying whatever comes to her mind. And I think Julie and Ivan's first meeting really exemplifies what millennials do very well, which is, you know, pursue happiness and find what feels good. And we've all had these perfect nights where everything just comes into alignment for some reason, and you wish the night wouldn't end. And the reason the night was perfect has less to do with the people, but your state of mind when you meet these people. And then you try to recreate these nights, but it doesn't really work because you can't recreate your state of mind. And so the issue then becomes like, when do you let go? Which takes me to the next millennial stage of life, which is fear of commitment. So when Julie meets Ivan, they have this, you know, perfect night, and they never see each other again. And so she goes back to Excel, and again, she's stuck in a rut, right? She wants to be a photographer, but it's taking a lot longer than she would like. But nonetheless, Excel is there, he's supportive, and he's kind of rooting for her. Just before her 30th birthday, Julie gets some success when she writes an article that's a viral sensation. And the article is in part inspired by this conversation she has with Ivan. And I love millennials, I love our generation and our need for self-satisfaction. Like, there's nothing better than becoming famous for something that is so uniquely you. And so at 29 years old, turning 30, this is her most significant accomplishment. So during her 30th birthday party, she is blowing out her candles, and at the same time looking back at the women in her family and where they were at 30. And thinking about these women, she realizes, well, they more or less lived the same life, but the end result was the same, which is that they weren't that happy. So I think part of the reason that Julie doesn't want to have children is because she wants to like break the habit. As Linkin Park would say, like it's a bit frustrating because there is no alternative blueprint, right? Like she's seen Axel's family, she's been surrounded by different couples, and to her they don't look that happy, right? And the scary thing is, okay, let's just say I started this family and I do this. Like, what happens if I just recreate the past, right? So the anxiety comes from like, what is there another way to do this? And that's probably why she's so attracted to Ivan. It's because he's a blank slate, you know, she can start over with him. And so when she sees him again, it's like tempting fate, you know, and again, if you're waiting for something to happen, something will happen. And a random encounter at a bookstore changes everything. And so they see each other again. And at one point, Ivan says, listen, I don't want to bother you if you're happy. And I think the idea of him is what allows Julie to break up with her boyfriend. And it's a very tough situation, right? Because a part of the millennial struggle is, how do I know I'm picking the right one? How do I know who's the one? You know, that's why we're so obsessed with like the one. And in a perfect universe, you know, I would love the opportunity to pause and explore different options to confirm whether or not the grass is greener or equally more green, right? How great would it be if we could just pause time and check, you know, like just kind of see how all these alternative endings. And that's what Julie does. So in probably the best scene of this whole movie, time stops, right? So Julie's at a crossroads. She's thinking about breaking up with her boyfriend, but first she needs to know if the grass is greener. So time stops and she runs. Everything is frozen. And the idea of freezing time is interesting because it allows you to catch up. Because sometimes things move faster than we can process. And she grabs Ivan from the bookstore and they have this whirlwind kind of La La Land date around town. And by the end of that date, she runs back to her boyfriend. The scene of her running back to her conscious body, I think is interesting because I can't tell if she's running away or running towards a new beginning. But whatever the case, she decides in that moment it's over and she's gonna break up with him. So when she breaks up with Axel, she says to him, I want it to be over. And by it, I think she means the stress and guilt of knowing this man would be better off. So her argument is like, I'm leaving you. You deserve a woman who's more serious than I am and who will give you the children and, you know, the life that you want. Axel, he tries his best, right? And I think it is true. Once you have made a decision, it's almost impossible for someone to change your mind. So Axel says as clearly as he can, like, listen, I am willing to not have children and be with you, then break up. But that does nothing to ease her worries. And their relationship beautifully illustrates the millennial tension between logic and emotion. So emotionally, she loves him, but logically, she doesn't love him, which is why she says, I love you, but I don't. And I can understand Julie's frustration, right? She feels like a spectator in her own life, letting things happen to her. And I thought it was weird that she said that because here's someone who left medical school to work at a bookshop. So you're not a spectator, and yet you feel like a spectator. And this takes me to another millennial trope that I think the movie unintentionally dismantles, which is like the one that got away. And so Axel in this conversation, he's trying his best. He's really trying to, you know, keep her and say, listen, we can work this out. And Julie just says point blank, like, sometimes I want to feel. And by feel, she means, you know, sometimes there's no good reason why something has to end. It just has to end. And the reason it has to end is this fear of the unknown, right? Julie and Axel have created such a bubble that she feels like Bambi in his presence. Like, she literally does not know what life would look like outside of him. So she has to go. And even in leaving him, she understands that this is a significant relationship and that she could very well regret leaving him. But that does not stop her. And so just like that, she jumps into the next stage of life, which is fear of the unknown. And before she gets with Ivan, Ivan has to break up with his girlfriend. And Ivan, like Julie, feels stuck. You know, he describes his girlfriend as the sum of Western guilt. And I love people like this because they're so privileged. They're so burdened by their privilege, right? So Ivan's girlfriend is just super woke, and she's super like, you know, overly conscious to the point where it's so pretentious. And so he's just done, right? So he needs to start over. And Julie is a blank slate, so he jumps right in. And just like that, new apartment, new life. And I think Julie's motivation for being with Ivan is to be young again. So when you're in an age gap relationship, sometimes a person can age you. You know, like you feel like you have to catch up to them. Whereas when you're with somebody who's at the same level as you, you're in the same place, right? Like Ivan doesn't want kids anytime soon. He doesn't want kids. She's at a bookstore, he's in a coffee shop. Like you're in the same place. And so you can kind of tolerate each other better. Like you're more flexible. You don't have time knocking on your door, right? Like you can kind of breathe a bit. And at one point she says to him, like, listen, I don't want to be the sensible choice, but while your girlfriend was the hot choice, right? Like I'm here and I hope you see me as exciting as I see you. And they had a whole vibe. Julie and Ivan have created this wonderful bubble. And in one of my favorite scenes, they invite a bunch of friends over and they take something that they shouldn't. And this gives us insight to what's going on in Julie's head. And this chapter is called Julie's Narcissistic Circle. And one of the issues that's highlighted is Julie's sort of poor relationship with her father. So the only time Julie and her father speak is when she reaches out to him. And at one point, Axel gets so annoyed that he says, listen, you can start your own family. The idea being that tradition is death. Like, having a family doesn't necessarily mean you have to do everything your family did, right? And again, a lot of the anxiety that is being revealed in these hallucinations is Julie's sort of like, okay, well, what else is there? And so in this hallucination, she sees everybody she's ever known, right? She sees Axel, his cartoon, and what's worse is that everybody is just laughing at her and poking at her. And I think there's nothing worse than ridicule, age, and regret, right? Like there's nothing worse than feeling like you're wasting time and you have potential. Like that's the thing with millennials, like we have endless potential that we will like one day reach, but like when, right? So all this potential and you're aging and you're childless, and it feels like everyone is laughing at you. And that's always a fear, right? Where you kind of wonder how other people see you. You know, like what did they see when they see this 30-year-old good-looking woman who's childless and works at a bookstore, right? Are they thinking, oh, that's so admirable that she's working on her goals? Or are they laughing at her thinking, wow, that was a waste of a person? And so the dream sequence ends and, you know, everything is fine. You know, she tells Ivan, you know, thanks for putting up with me. You know, I can feel completely myself around you. That's the thing about Julie and Ivan. When you're with somebody who's in the same place as you, you don't really care. You're like, okay, well, we're the same. So we can be at peace with one another. But everything changes when one day she's working out and she spots an interview with Axel. So during their time apart, Axel's cartoon has become a movie and he's becoming quite famous, but he's getting a lot of criticism from new wave feminists. And in this interview that she spots, he's defending his work. He's basically saying, listen, just because my art doesn't say what you want it to say explicitly doesn't mean it can't. And I think it was a good commentary on like cancel culture. Like nowadays people make art as like it has to have meaning. Like the focus is I want to make something meaningful rather than making good art. And art is a space to be messy and controversial, and like, you know, you can't police art. That's kind of the whole point. And so he's defending his cartoon, and you know, as hard as he tries, like he keeps getting pushback. But you know, I just thought it was an interesting commentary. Like, here's someone, just because you do something you love doesn't mean it's going to be easy. And so shortly after that interview, an old friend walks into the bookstore who notifies her that Axel is dying of cancer. And so as soon as she finds out that Axel is dying of cancer, it was like a light switch that goes off in her head. Like she just stops caring. All the love she had for Ivan is gone. And on top of that, she finds out she's pregnant. And so to ease her worries, she goes and visits Axel at the hospital. And Axel's condition is heartbreaking because we assume the best for people. Like, I assume that people are having the best time without me. If I let you go, I'm thinking I'm letting you go to do better things, to do more amazing things. And I'm sure that's what Julie thought. Like, by letting him go, he would become famous, he would find the woman of his dreams, he would, have this family, and everything would work out. And instead, he's dying, childless, and what seems like alone. A lot of Julie's attraction to Axel comes from the belief that he was someone who never doubted what he was doing or supposed to be doing. And when you're around people like Axel, you feel lost, you feel like a sheep that needs herding. And Axel's condition is heartbreaking because it kind of speaks to this desire for like meaning and purpose, right? Like, what am I supposed to be doing? Who is the one? Where am I supposed to be going? What am I supposed to do? What if I fall? What if I die? What if all these things happen? And these are all the wrong questions. So listening to Axel is totally heartbreaking because at one point he's reflecting on his past, and he says, before his diagnosis, he was super frustrated that the world that he once knew was changing. And now that he's dying, it's his future he mourns, right? Like, there's nothing to look forward to. He wasted so much time worrying about what could go wrong, but what did go wrong was never the thing that, he worried about. And isn't that the truth? I think sometimes we theorize all these doomsday scenarios, all these horrible things that could go wrong. But the thing that goes wrong is something totally random, right? Something totally out of your control where you're like, what? That's what happened? That's what took you out? And again, I don't think in a million years she thought this man would be dying of cancer. Again, Axel, there are certain people you just don't think to worry about, and he's just one of those people. And his condition kind of calls into question, like, what if? And this takes me to another millennial trope that this movie unintentionally dismantles, which is right person, wrong time. If Julie had met Axel at a different time in her life, would it have mattered? No, I don't think it would have mattered. And I don't like the idea of right person, wrong time, because what does timing have to do with it? It seems like a flaky kind of reason. But I do think there are right people for you at a certain time in your life. So when Julie tells Axel she's pregnant, he tries to console her, right? He feels bad. She's pregnant and, he's dying. And he's trying to console her. And he says, well, if he's kind, if the man that you're seeing is kind, and you're the mom, what could go wrong? And he's listening to her like continuously doubt herself and feel bad, and he kind of takes a moment he steps back and he says, if there's something I regret, it's that I never managed to make you see how wonderful you are. You were the most important relationship in my life, the love of my life, and a damn good person. I know it's not the same for you, but it's normal. You have many years left to live. And that last line, right? Like, tomorrow is never promised. And I think sometimes we're so hard on ourselves and we isolate ourselves and we think we're doing other people a favor by removing ourselves from their lives, when in fact we're being selfish. And sometimes the relationships we run away from, or the friendships that we break up, those are the things that we needed to grow, right? Like, it's hard to know, again, that what if question, like, what if I did this or what if I did that? Like, you can't let it hold you back. And so she leaves the hospital and she tells Ivan she's pregnant, and she has to explain herself to this man, right? So she's taking out all her anger out on him. Everything he does is wrong. She talks down to him at one point, saying, oh, not all of us want to work at a coffee shop all our lives. Like, she really kind of attacked this man's like character. And she says, listen, I never see anything through. I go from one thing to another. And I can totally relate to that, living new lives, starting new chapters. Like, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, like sometimes you feel like you've lived 9 lives within the span of like a few years. Like, it's crazy how quickly life can change. Like, you look at Julie, she goes from doctor to psychiatrist to photographer. You've grown, and sometimes you don't see your own growth. And so sadly for Julie, the pregnancy ends before it begins. And so this what if question is answered for her, right? Like, she never gets to make a decision because the decision is made for her. And just like that, her time with Ivan ends, right? Like, this bubble they created, this optimism, totally died. So the story ends where it begins, with Julie and Axel. And Julie and Axel's final moments were quite sad, right? So Julie is taking photographs of Axel to kind of, remember him when he dies. And Axel is just over it, right? And he kind of gives a final warning, I feel, to the audience. He says, "I'm so tired of pretending everything is okay. I don't want to be a memory. I don't want to be a voice in your head. I don't want to live on through my art. I want to be in my flat with you and be happy together." And that's what life is about, right? It's about relationships. It's not about milestones and achievements, right? It's the everyday that makes you happy, and fighting for an everyday in which you wake up and you have peace of mind, right? And that's kind of Axel's parting words. And we don't see Axel dying, but we feel him dying. And so during his last moments, she goes for a long walk and she stays up through the night. And when the sun rises, he's gone, right? Again, emphasizing that tomorrow is never promised. And this takes us to the final stage of millennial life, joy of missing out, and essentially just accepting what is. And so the movie ends and Julie has made it. She's working as a photographer, she's on set, she's no longer at this bookstore. And she has this conversation with this actress. She's taking pictures of her. And just as she's packing up to leave, she notices that this actress and her ex have a baby together. And she's smiling, right? Because here's someone who he didn't want kids, and now he has a family. And everything she wanted for Axel, is here. And so in the final moments before the movie ends, she's alone in her apartment. And she's editing this photo of her ex's new girl. And you don't know if she's happy, right? I think it's a mix of emotions. It's like sadness, regret, happiness, relief, knowing that, someone you loved is better off, but also wondering, that could have been me. And so what's the moral of the story? I think the moral of the story is that, happiness is a state of mind. So regret, what ifs, you can't change the past, but you can sort of curate your future. And I think, again, sometimes we can get so fixated on reaching this state where it's okay, well, once I have this job, or when will the struggle end? When will I go through the hurdle? But the struggle basically never ends. You will be struggling forever. But it's kind of cultivating an everyday where you wake up and you're not dreading your work, you're not dreading the people that you're around. It's kind of actively curating your experiences and your relationships so that you do create an environment where you can breathe. And fighting for an everyday means maybe moving from the place that you're in, maybe means switching jobs, switching careers. And that takes sacrifice, right? It's not about, you do what you love, you must be happy. No one has it figured out. As much as we want to believe that there are people who have it figured out, they don't. And so again, I think it's in the everyday, right? That's why they always tell people to enjoy the process, because the process is what gives you that optimism, right? And then once you get what you want, you're oh, there's more things and more things and more things. So you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.